Welcome back in the Drylands. Today we are starting our build more or less where we left the last time, at the bridge going past the enclosures for zebras and Nile face. This is part of the Sahara and the Nile area, and this part of the park will now continue with some species representing the Sahara Desert. We are starting with making a double door entrance for a big aviary that we'll be building today. The guest will be able to walk into it for a more up close experience. And since this is an aviary, we will of course let some birds move in here, in form of flamingos. But the flamingos will not be alone in this large facility, but we'll get back to that later. I wish I could add even more birds in here, but as we all know, we barely have any to choose from in Planet Zoo. But in case more shows up in the future fitting for this area, there's plenty of room for them in here. Building this was not a very straightforward process, and I ended up with a lot of trials and errors. So as you might have noticed, there are things in this speed build video I have cut out, to avoid it becoming too long and uninteresting. So you won't see how I placed every stone and plant and details like that, but I've tried my best to keep in the most complicated and creative aspects of building this. So I hope you don't feel like I jump around in it too much. Some details also got added after I was done recording, and I might still change or add something to it as I continue this part of the park. I currently don't have very good backstage areas for the animals and staff, so I'll look into that another day. Same goes for educational signs and such. And I must admit I completely forgot to add a shelter for the flamingos. I probably have to do a bit of research on that, since I'm not totally sure how you typically will house them in a climate like this. I tend to run into problems like that with this zoo, since I know the most about animal caretaking from a central and northern European point of view. The flamingos were a bit of a last minute decision for this section here. They already had a home in the zoo, in an area called the Dry Bay, which is based on the coast of Namibia. The future of that area is a bit unclear, but I think I'm going to remove it, since I'm not too fond of it anymore. The animals there are African penguins and flamingos, and the flamingos are now getting a much more interesting place to stay over here. And what I end up doing with the penguins I don't really know. Greater flamingos got a big home range overall, so they're easy to be tied in with various African themes. The reason I ended up moving them down here is simply just because I wanted to give a big aviary build a try. And they are actually found in many locations in and around the Sahara Desert, so it made sense to move them down to this part of the park. While building this I ended up doing some minor changes to the zebra and Nile habitat next door. I had already made a kind of viewing platform for that enclosure, but I redone that completely so it would fit better into this aviary. I went with a quite simple design for this building, and a bit by accident the colors of it gave it a bit of a North African vibe, which of course fits this area very well. Since we lack birds, I decided to make room for another creature in here instead, which I needed to add in this part of the park anyway, the Scimitar-Horned Oryx. And you might find it a bit weird with hoof stocks in an aviary, but you can actually find example of this in real life, and it can be a quite interesting way to experience these kinds of animals. When I built this I had an aviary from Antwerp Zoo in Belgium a bit in mind, which I went to some years ago, even though my build today does not really look anything like it. But in Antwerp they keep Cape buffaloes together with lots of different species of African birds. Having birds moving around both where you are standing yourself as a guest and where the buffaloes are really makes the whole area become more tied together and feel more alive. And even though you and the buffaloes are separated in a safe way, being under the same roof as them almost make it feel like you are sharing the same space. So I wanted to create a bit of that feeling in here, but with different animals. Even though this aviary will look like one big shared habitat, it is actually featuring two habitats rather than just one. Up here in the raised area with the large body of water you'll find the flamingos, and on the ground level the oryxes will be. I did it this way since I wanted my flamingos to stay in one group, otherwise I risk having 20 flamingos spread out in the whole area. When you see flamingos in zoos they will typically stand together in a group in a part of the exhibit, and since this is sandbox I'm using the no escape function so I don't have to worry about if they can get down from here or not. And by making it into two habitats it was also easier to make decent traversable areas for both species. Of course I ended up using a lot of mesh pieces for this build. Building big structures with mesh tend to be quite annoying. Since they're not on a grid like the wall sets, you end up spending a lot of time with moving them around. I had several attempts before I ended up with a shape I could deal with, These pieces are also somewhat 2D in the design and consist of thin lines, so they tend to turn more or less invisible from some angles, making it even more difficult. And as if that wasn't enough, I also ended up making some stuff more complicated for myself. A little too late I realized I had built this whole complex on the wrong grid, so it got tricky to align it with the building from the enclosure next to it. When I build something like this, it does become a bit tricky for me to keep up with the realism, since I really don't know much about the engineering work behind stuff like this. So when I place poles and similar, it is mostly just by gut feeling, and then I cross my fingers it doesn't look totally off to people who knows more about this stuff than me. You might wonder why I haven't used a lot of the new grass pieces from the conservation pack yet, since it is really great for making an area look very detailed. Well, I try to avoid it in enclosures with grazing hoofstock, such as many species of antelopes as well as horses, since keeping long grass in a limited space with animals like that is almost impossible in real life. A good example here is the Przewalski horses. I've seen a lot of very skilled content creators build habitats for them lately, where they've put in big amounts of tall grass and plants like that, and it looks fantastic, and I wish I was that good, but when they then use the word realistic about it, I'm always a bit skeptical. Grass in enclosures for horses and similar animals in real life is almost always very short, or in some cases mostly just dirt or sand, cause they will eat it all. But that is often an issue for me in this game, which I am first really learning to deal with now. Over detailing the ground and such is often what makes it appear the most realistic, and the easiest way to do that is often with plants. But a big number of smaller plants in a herbivore enclosure is often not very realistic, so it's a bit of a paradox. This is also why I've started to use a bigger amount of small stones and dried out plants and such to compensate a bit for it, even though that can also get to an amount where it is not that realistic to look at anymore. And in this case I also ended up using some elephant grass, which I'm not so sure if the antelopes would leave alone. So it's all a balance I'm trying to learn how to deal with. When this is done, the next and probably last enclosure for this section of the park will be for fennec foxes. I don't really have anything planned for them yet, I just know they'll move in down here somewhere. I assume it will turn into some kind of a speed build video as well, so make sure to subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss out on that. There are still a few African species I'm considering for the park, but I'm not exactly sure where to put them yet. Maybe I can make it work with a more of a standalone section for them, rather than placing them within one of the two African areas. But I need to make up my mind about that. I have had a lot of fun in this park lately, so I think we'll stick around here some more. The North American area mostly needs some detailing by now, and perhaps a bit of redos. This new African area has left the other African area, which is for the Kalahari and Namib deserts, with some loose ends. So we need to look into that as well. Otherwise there'll be staff areas and billboards to work on, and I'll do my best to turn all this into interesting videos. But I'm not really sure if we'll manage to do all this before a new DLC shows up, even though that would be nice. Some type of a bird pack has been what I hope to see the most for a long time. The lack of birds is probably my biggest issue with this game at the moment. Otherwise some new addition to this park would be nice to see. I would especially like a few more species for my North American area, but also a few Australian species for an outback area would be very useful. So I wouldn't mind if we ended up with an Oceanian pack or something like that. What I miss the most for this Sahara and the Nile area here is just some more birds of any kind, and an African spurred tortoise, perhaps a dromedary as well. So it's really going to be interesting to see what Frontier got planned for us next and when it will be. And now we're almost ready for the cinematic shots, so it's about time we take a look at all that. I hope you had a good time with this video and with this build, and that you could maybe find a bit inspiration in it. And if you liked it, don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to Salamanders TV.